Today we're going to be taking a look at a load of OMC terminal tackle. Now this is by no means the entire range that they have in the terminal tackle, but it's a good place to start. But before we jump into each and every one of these individual items, please just take a few seconds to subscribe to us and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any future uploads. It really does help the channel to grow and helps us to bring more content like this towards you. Now to my left are several different items that they've sent me from One More Cast. Some hooks, some aligners, well lots of aligners. I don't think I'm going to have to buy aligners for several years now. Some bait screws, some little bits for help for your putty, and then to my right I've got a few different rigs tied up using some of these things to see the differences between them and also how I've utilised them in some of my go-to rigs myself. So it might give you a bit more of an idea of how you can implement these into your own fishing. But we'll start with the hooks. We have the Kong Valley Surrender Curve. Now this is your pretty standard shape curve shank. This is one of my favourite patterns of hooks, as you'll see when we go over to here in a second with some of the rigs that I've tied up. I've opted for the curve shank on quite a few of my rigs, especially on my Fluoro Ds, and that is one of the rigs that is recommended on the back of this. So it's a lovely curve shank, wide gape, straight point with a barb, and also you've got a slightly inturned eye which gives that nice bit of aggression. Now I use this with only about a 15-pound fluorocarbon when I tie up my D-rigs, so that outturned eye obviously affects how aggressive your hook hold is going to be or how aggressive that angle is going to be. The thicker wire you go or the thicker line you go, of course, that's going to accentuate that kind of aggressiveness. But also if you add a kicker, which we'll get onto in a second, that can also adjust how much of an aggressive angle you get on the outturn of the eye. So that's the curve. Then we've got the Conti. Now this is called the Cassian Conti because it's developed with big carp in mind, going abroad, maybe some of those fish that are hard to catch, heavily pressured, and you don't want anything to be a weak point. And this is heavy gauge wire and a really strong hook pattern. Again, quite an aggressive turn in the eye and straight point. And lastly, we have the Surrender Chod. And this is much more akin to be used with something like a stiffer material, something that you use for a choddy or a hinge stiff, something like that, because the eye is actually bent the opposite direction as what you'd expect. And that's because when you put in a stiffer material through there that's not as flexible, you don't want to have an aggressive angle. It's just going to shut the gate on that hook and not give you a very good ability to hook anything really. So that's why you've got the outturned eye. And again, straight point with a barb on that as well. So that's the hooks, and I've got some of those tied up to my right. We'll move on to them in a second. But the next load of things are aligners, and there's 3 different ones in the range, both available in large and small. You've got the Mag Aligner, large, Blood Aligner, large, Worm Aligner, large, and Core Aligner, large. Now that name is basically referring to the color, because all of these aligners here are the same pattern, same shape, but the different colors are the names that you're given. So the Mag Aligner is white, the Blood Aligner is red, the Worm Aligner is brown, and the Core Aligner is yellow. So that's how you differentiate the colors from that. And then moving along from them, we've got the Core Aligner curve, Mag Aligner curve, Worm Aligner curve, and of course the Blood Aligner curve. And this is much more of just a subtle bend. And then the last one is the intern large, so again, it's the Worm Aligner, Mag Aligner, Core Aligner, Blood Aligner. That's a lot of ers for a West Country person to say in one sentence, but that's the different colors and that's the different way they look. And as you can see, I've tied up 3 identical rigs with the same hook pattern, but with different aligners. So we've got the intern, curve, and standard aligner. So as you can see how they affect the exit angle of the line. So the one I've opted for on some of my rigs over here, if I go to my go-to rigs and how I normally tie them up, my Fluoro D rig, I've gone for the Blood Aligner standard. So this is the one that looks a bit more like a maggot. I suppose if it's red though, it's going to look a bit like a bloodworm, but it really does look like, if you just put these down on a bucket, I had these out yesterday filming some of the cutaway shots, and they really do look extremely similar to maggots, and they're very realistic, and that just gives it a nice exit angle. So if I was using a thicker material for my fluoro, then this kicker would mean that I have the same exit angle, whether I go for a 15-pound or 25-pound or whatever, it's going to be that same exit angle and the really, really aggressive turning in. And there's a few other things on this rig that you'll notice, which we'll get onto in a second, but that's what I've gone for with the Fluoro D. My other go-to rig is just a stripped back, it's like a coated braid combi where I strip back just before the hook to give a bit more movement. And I've got another little addition on there, which we'll get onto in a second. Bit of tubing just to hold the hair in place. And again, I've gone for that same aligner pattern. That's the one I probably opt for the most in my own fishing, and that's the worm color. And then lastly, I have a stiff hinge. So if I was going to use a pop-up rig, this is probably what I'd opt for. And on here you can see I haven't actually got any aligners on there, but there is a hook bead, and that brings us nicely onto the hook beads. Again, available in all of the different colors that we've just gone through. So you've got the corn yellow, the blood red, the blood white, the maggot white, I think I'm getting all these colours wrong. It's been a long day. I caught a few fish last night as well. You got the brown for the worm, white for the maggots, yellow for the corn, and red for the bloodworm. So that's the colours of the hook beads. You've got them in large and small. And next up, we have the Tweakers bait screws. Now, these are an eyed bait screw. So basically a pimped up bait screw, because they don't just hold one bait that you screw down onto them. There's a little hole that's been milled into them or drilled into them, so you can put floss through there. So you can now add however you would normally put your boilies on, or pop-ups or wafters or whatever, to a bait screw, but you then have the floss coming out through the middle of that, so you can then do a topper. So like with the rig here, so this is just dropped it on the floor. With the fluoro D rig I've tied here, I often use a bait screw with just a 50mm wafter, catch loads of fish like that, but sometimes I just want to top it just to give a bit of extra colour. You can't do that with most bait screws, but because this is the hole in there, I've managed to screw a bait down onto the screw with the floss coming out the top, and then I've put a little bit of pop-up corn on the top of it, so it should waft on the bottom like a little snowman type presentation, and I've blobbed that down just like I normally would if I was using floss. So it's a hybrid between a hook ring swivel and a bait screw, so you can do basically anything you want very quickly. You can add toppers, or you can have them as a standard bait screw, and you're good to go. And the other little addition on these bait screws that I really like, because they can get quite fiddly when you get the bait nearly butted down to the base and you can't get it in any further. There's just a little raised lip or ridge, perfect for just fixing your nails onto, and gives you enough purchase to be able to screw that bait screw in really nice and flush. Small little thought, but it really does make a big difference when it's something that you use in your fishing a lot, and that's a problem you often come up against. It's nice that that's been solved. And lastly, we've got the Dazzler's dog bone sinkers in small and large. These are attached to your rig as you're making them, so instead of, you could use putty with them, that's what they're designed for, but these are sinkers already, so they've already got a weight value to them, which will keep your rig pinned down. Slide it onto your rig, and it pinches the line much firmer than what it would if you just put putty on. It also gives you something for the putty to grab onto. So again, if I show you this fluoro D rig that I've tied up earlier, I've put one of these small sinkers on here, so that was already probably enough to weigh it down. I don't tend to put too much weight on my D-rigs because it's not a pop-up. I just want to have that very last bit, make sure it's a bit more pinned down, a bit more weight to pull that hook back down when a fish tries to reject the rig. So the sinker on its own will probably be enough, but because that's there and pinches the line really nicely, it's really hard to move it. I have to put quite a lot of pressure on that before I can start moving that sinker. So that's already a benefit, but it also gives something really easy for the putty to latch onto by itself. And when you then mold it round, you get a really nice shape. Even if it does look a bit like a rat drop-in, it's snug, it's secure, that's not going to come off, and it means that your rig is always going to be pinned down. So it should also help you in waters that have crayfish. If you're just using these sinkers on their own, especially if you go up for the large one, I think crayfish are going to have much more of a difficulty dealing with them than they would if it was just putty straight on the line. So that is a quick run through of all the different things that One More Cast have sent over to me. Hopefully they send more in the future, because if it's anything like these things here, it's all going to be top quality. And I forgot one of the best bits, none of it's that expensive. Looking on the website, I'm pretty sure every single item here is £5 or less. Some's only about £3.50ish, so you're really not breaking the bank. And it's also another small thing I haven't actually mentioned, is that all the boxes and packaging are cardboard, so recyclable. And if I open this up and pull out how it's stored inside, again, it's like grease-proof paper, so it's no plastic. That's such a big thing, because there's so much plastic in fishing. Every little helps. Whether it makes a huge difference, I'll leave that up to you, but I think that's a nice little touch as well, that it's forward-thinking, it's actually environmentally friendly, and it's not breaking the bank. So for more information, do head over to the OMC website, and also if you haven't seen the previous video I've done for One More Cast on the elbows, I'm still using them, and I think I will do for a very long time. So do go and check that out if you haven't done so already. As I said, please do subscribe to us if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any future uploads. And if you did, give the video a like. That'd be great help for us as well. So cheers for watching, and I'll see you again soon.